called the Philosophy Roulette Review, because this is Philosophy Roulette. So that'll be up. Hopefully, that'll be my next thing to work on, I think. But anyway, here we go. Let's make sure the music's slower. Some believe that groups can be agents. In opposition to this view, others argue that groups lack something that appears necessary for agency, a body. Without a body, a group cannot be an agent because it has to rely on others to act on its behalf. Whether or not groups can be agents has important implications because agency is seen as a precondition for moral responsibility, for example. Yeah, and so this is the old joke. I mean, I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. And that's because here in the U.S., Texas is want to kill people. They have capital punishment in Texas. But, we also treat corporations as people in terms of free speech. Thank you, Supreme Court. So the question is, if there's no body to kill, like there is no physical body to kill, then how could it actually be a person? How could it actually be an agent? Okay. What makes this objection against group agency particularly interesting is that the issue rests on a more general question. To be an agent of an action, in what sense does someone need to have a body? This is a question for theories of action. Many theories of action, at least at first glance, seem to analyze actions in terms of bodily movements. These theories must be examined with respect to the precise sense of embodiment they presuppose. If they require agents to be embodied in a strict sense that I explain below, they risk unduly restricting the scope of application. Such theories would exclude not only group agency, but several other forms of agency, such as agency in virtual reality or by individuals augmented by robotics or artificial intelligence, for example, the action of controlling a drone via brain-machine interface. Viper says, Viper was born male, I identify as male, but according to Stouffer's lasagna, I'm a family of 4. There you go. You see? If you take boxes of cardboard boxes as your metaphysics, you might run into problems. I assume they're served in, like, Stouffer's comes in, like, cardboard boxes. Prof says, I'm about to embody my foot up your ass in the strict sense. Yes, always in the strictest sense, not in the loose sense. Strict sense. And I'm sure that's not a real threat. I'm just finding like TOS to be sort of hilarious. The view that agency must be embodied is not implausible. Several authors assign an essential, indispensable, or otherwise special role to the natural human body. And if anyone here does not know Prof is another streamer. Let's give him a quick shout out. He is a philosophy and sociology professor, and he generally streams Souls content, but like he talks philosophy while streaming Souls content. And his wife also streams, and we're trying to get her to 1,000 followers. Maybe I'll give her a shout out later. But like, everyone should go follow Prof. Anyway. Okay. Several authors assign, Prof. The idea that your wife and Kristen are going to do a 48-hour stream, I'm sorry, my friend. It's going to be hard. Dear Lord. Okay. Since MX says, and whose family small enough to fit in a cereal box that's family size in my eye? Yeah, that's true. Okay. Yeah, so some people think you need a body of some sort to like be an agent. And you can see why. What would a disembodied mind really be? Like if you had like a dualism and without a body, then you'd be talking about pure mind, and it would not be causally efficacious in the world. If you think there's like pure mind, how would it ever actually affect the physical world that we live in? This goes all the way back to Descartes. Like the criticisms, what was her name? The lady who, it doesn't matter. There was a lady who like started writing letters to Descartes and be like, dude, your mind is like, it can't work. But like, yeah, this is why you need a body to have any sort of interaction with our world. Otherwise it doesn't do anything. A body without organs. Yeah. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. Thank you, Aris. Aris is an actual philosopher or actual academic philosopher. But like, yeah, this has gone back to Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia telling Descartes you're full of shit because how does the disembodied mind actually interact with the world, the pineal gland? But that makes no sense. Adam says, I always thought our body was just our mind's interface with material. Well, you're going to have a problem, Adam Fighter. with like, this is, you're in good company. I should start off by saying many people hold theories like that. The question is, how does your mind interface at all? What is the mind that interfaces with the body? How does that happen? This is a dualism. If you make a hard break between mind and body, and if the body is an interface for the mind, how does the body interface with the mind if the mind is of a separate sort of thing? Usually people go hardcore physicalist. There is no mind, it's just brain, and we're just sort of making shit up about what we think we're doing, which is fine. Lots of people like that. There's panpsychists who say, well, everything has mind, so that's not a problem also. And then there's like some stranger views, probably where I am. I don't even have a good theory about how any of this works. So yeah. Oh yeah, then you're with me with Prof for Prof, which is basically... Well, I think I disagree with Prof for Prof on some of this stuff, but like, I'm not a hardcore physicalist. I am somewhere off in this. I think what we're talking about a lot of times has very little to do with what's actually going on what we think we're talking about when we're talking about mind. So it's like, I think it's almost irrelevant. I don't think we're anywhere near figuring this out. So like, I'm just sort of a quietist about this at the moment. But Kant's a but. That's what Kant is. Not but Kant. Kant is a but. Yeah, if you have a specific question, Sensei Max, let me know. But yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about like mind, and then yeah, we have a body that like gives us sensations from the world, and then your mind somehow like deals with that. But again, we're not worried about Kant. We're worried about Descartes. The more fundamental break was earlier. That says there's mind and world. Frank says, whether there's non-physical stuff is completely irrelevant to any decision I will ever make. Yeah, so it only matters if you care about talking about philosophy of mind. And insofar you don't care about talking about philosophy of mind, this will never make any difference to you. And that's perfectly fair. Yeah. Like I said, my view is I don't think we have any clue what's going on with our mentality, so when we talk about it, I don't think it makes any sense. So it's hard to, like, whatever. Okay, continuing with the paper. In contrast, some people hold the view that these new technologies are extensions of ourselves. They contend that our agency is malleable and that we human individuals just are these shifting coalitions of tools. Yeah, and so this is kind of what you mean by, like, it's an interface, and we could interface the world differently. Like, yeah, there is no necessary body. It's all just sort of like interfacing with other stuff. Yeah. In this paper, the author argues that agency does not require embodiment in the strict sense. Therefore, embodiment cannot be used to rule out group agency. Instead, actions can be embodied in different ways as exemplified by group agency, human-machine interactions, and virtual realities. I examined the literature to collect different assumptions about embodiment. The full collection of these assumptions characterizes embodiment in its strict sense, what I call the embodiment view. It consists of the following three assumptions. First, an agent needs to perform an action herself. What? See, this is the problem. If you're going to start saying herself, like right at the beginning, that's already assuming that there is a unified self. But like, okay, we're going to shelve this like very fast objection I have. Put that aside. An agent needs to perform an action herself, assuming there is any identifiable self. If a button is pressed, it must be the agent who does the pressing. Second, the performance of an action requires a bodily movement. There cannot be an overt action without a body that moves. Third, a bodily movement, and this is not a bowel movement, involves a Sorry, I'm reading this. Third, a bodily movement involves a movement of the agent's biological body. This last assumption rules out that vicarious movements count as the agent's own movements. Okay. The embodiment view seems easily refuted in the light of mental actions or omissions. That, however, would still leave so-called overt actions, which essentially involve bodily movements and are neither only mental actions nor omissions. I show that the embodiment view is false even for overt actions. So yeah, so me raising my hand, I guess it's false. You don't need a body for this or something. We'll find out. Yet instead of rejecting the embodiment view to core, I suggest that it can help us to structure the different kinds of disembodied actions. As each assumption of the embodiment view is relaxed, the set of things that we consider to be actions broaden to include actions that are not embodied in a strict sense, such as proxy actions, and extended movements. First, this investigation yields a systematic taxonomy of disembodied actions. Second, the rejection of the embodiment view, even for overt actions, suggests that the agents of such disembodied actions can be real agents, just as any ordinary embodied human. Adam says maybe she means a reflex, which is an involuntary movement of the body. Possible, but I'm not sure yet. And there's a million ways to slice this up. Human agency has been discussed for thousands of years, and so there's a lot of views. And so I just have to kind of wait and see what's going to happen here. Adam says reflexes work even after a person has been paralyzed. Yeah, so that's interesting. And that's a good example. There's going to be some weird stuff, like there's a very famous like ghost hand experiments too. So there's some weird experiments that have been done the last 100 years. So there's going to be stuff. Viper says, yep, orgasm is a reflex and you can make a corpse come. Good to know. I'm happy. I'm like edified in knowing that. Don't ask Vipers how he knows such things. Okay. We won't ask how Vipers knows that he can make a corpse come. The paper is structured as follows. After saying more about the notion of agency in Section 2, I present the embodied view in Section 3. I then argue in Section 4 that the embodied view in some cases contradicts basic assumptions about agency. Since the embodied view consists of 3 assumptions, I investigate in Section 5 how any one of the assumptions can be given up to escape the contradiction. This gives us the taxonomy of disembodied actions. See, this is kind of fun. I like the idea that we're going to have a taxonomy of disembodied actions. Like, just off the bat, I like this author because the idea that you're going to say, I'm going to make a taxonomy of disembodied actions, that just sounds like fun to me. Yeah. Okay, agency over actions. Viper says, from Bonk, The Curious Coupling of Science and Sex by Mary Roach. Okay, so there's a nice book on the topic. Good to know. Author makes only minimal assumptions about agency in order to investigate the common stance that different theories of action take towards embodiment and not rule out certain theories of action from the beginning. My focus is on agency as a relation between an agent A and her action X, which contrasts with being an agent, a predicate. Yeah, so we're talking about the relation of a person to the action, not just the status of agency or the status of being an agent. This relational notion of agency is interesting for 2 reasons. First, agency in this sense is often assumed to be necessary for moral responsibility. You are responsible only for the things over which you have agency, that is, for your own actions and omissions. Second, agency over actions, the relation, seems necessary for agency simplicator, the predicate, that is, for being a person who has rights and duties. A minimal way of characterizing what different theories of action have in common is describing the agency relation as A is an agent of X, formally. This agency relation has 2 formal properties that will be relevant for the present argument. First, there must be at least one agent for each action. I call this first property closure because, figuratively speaking, it says that the realm of agency is closed in the sense that there are no freely dangling actions that have no agent associated with it. It should be so if I raise my hand, there has to be a person that raises their hand, and that happens to be me. There is no just disembodied hand raising without there being an agent. So I guess if there was a ghost and a ghost hand, then the agent would be the ghost hand, but there is no just raising of the hand that happens on its own. Okay. It should be noted that this assumption is compatible with joint or collective actions that have more than one agent. Second, only intentional systems stand in the agency relation. There is no action without mental states. Rather, each agent has beliefs, desires, intentions, or some other kind of mental state. And Adam, I guess this is towards what you were saying about reflexes and also Vipers about reflex things, that this has to be intentional. So if someone's dead, they have no intentional mental states. So the orgasm that you can create with a corpse is not an intention of that corpse. It would be of you, but that corpse cannot be held responsible for their action at that point. Yeah, and although it probably doesn't need to be said, do not be desecrating corpses. what was actually fun, there was actually a story about this from New York just from a few days ago. Maybe it was a week or two ago. Someone actually had sex with a dead body on a subway. Yes. And I think they caught the guy. But like they were looking for a guy who performed sexual acts on a corpse. Now, why was there a corpse on the subway? I don't know. How did this guy just find out there was a dead person? I don't know, but this is a current thing. Frank asks how much mental is required to be an agent. I suspect it's exactly enough to do, like they're only going to need enough to say, raise the hand. So they're going to just tie the mental to whatever the amount of action is. So if you say like someone is responsible for pushing a button, whatever mentality it is required to know about pushing a button and doing it, they're going to do it that way. Corpses can raise their hand too. The Lazarus reflex, yeah. Is my arm not an agent? Yeah, that's a problem there, Frank. I'm not sure what we know yet. We'll see what the author has to say. Frank says, or my whole body, not including my left arm, not an agent. Yeah, so if you start breaking this up, like, well, of course your whole body, not including your left arm, because you could lose your left arm and the rest of you would still be an agent, I take it. But, the question is, if you cut your left arm off, could it be an agent? The question is, how much mentality does it have? The question is, does it have any intention of doing what it does? Or is it just reflexes at that point? And if it's only reflexes, and it isn't like making a decision at all, then I'd say it doesn't have enough. Okay. But we'll see what this person has to say. And this is the idea, is intentional systems. Does your left hand have intentionality? And I've seen arguments that do say like parts of your body have intentionality. So like there are people who hold that. It's a hard argument, but like the idea that like there is a structure and something like some sort of intelligence built into the way your hand actually is gives it inherent intentionality. I've seen that argument before. Maybe we don't like that, but like it's been argued. Prof, you have a great night. Yeah, have a nice bath with... I don't know if you're bathing or you're bathing your son. I assume you're bathing your son. Have a great bath. Either way. Oh, dearie. Okay. Have a great night, Prof. Yeah. Yeah. And let's see if I can shout out Katie, the professor's wife X. Everyone go give Katie a follow. She's at 788 followers, I think. She's trying to get to 1,000. When she gets to 900, she's going to do a 48-hour subathon or follower-a-thon. And I'm sorry, Prof. But yeah, everyone go follow Katie. It's like that's Prof's better half. And so that is going to be a mess. I'm like, I can already see it. Anyway, it'll be a very entertaining mess. Okay, where were we? Yeah, so there is no action without mental state. Rather, each agent has beliefs, desires, intentions, or some other kind of mental state. Author leaves it open what kind it is to believe, desire, intend something, and I also make no assumptions about the kind of mental state that is involved in acting or about the way in which it is involved. And here's your answer, Frank. They're dodging this question. They're leaving it open. They're just saying you have to assume they intentionally did it. Okay, minimal characterization of agency. And the relation A is an agent of X holds between individuals A and actions X, such that closure for each action X there is at least one agent A, and intentional system each A has mental states. The closure assumption is plausible. It seems to be a conceptual truth that there cannot be an action without an agent. Likewise, the intentional systems assumption is plausible as well. In one way or another, actions, intentional or unintentional, must be related to an agent's mental states. No action can come from an agent who does not have any mental states at all. And now, again, the action of orgasm in like these reflex things after you're dead are not counting as actions here. They're just defining it this way. Okay, of course, the two assumptions provide only a terse characterization of agency, and they fall far short of a conceptual analysis. Yet between different competing analyses of agency, these two assumptions form common theoretical ground. Okay, the embodiment view. Take a moment to conjure up examples of agency. The actions that come to mind, such as pouring milk into your coffee or shutting the door, are likely to involve bodily movements. One might be tempted to think that performing a bodily movement is necessary for being an agent of an action. Excuse me. Yet there are cases that disprove this as a general claim. There are mental actions, such as making a decision, adding numbers, imagining a tree, that involve changes in the agent's body but not in bodily movements. That is, there are no changes in the macroscopic spatial relation that the body occupies. There are also omissions, such as not helping a friend or not attending a meeting. Most omissions do not involve bodily movements. But virtually everyone believes that there is a distinct third kind of action in addition to mental actions and omissions, namely so-called overt actions. Drink. I'm losing it. Overt actions are taken to essentially involve the movement of a body. What makes an action an overt action is precisely that it involves the movement of one's body. It is this specific kind of action that seems to fit the embodiment view. When analyzing a concept, we often begin by examining paradigmatic instances of analysandum, that is, the thing we want to analyze. The analysandum. This is the Latin using the dumb to say the thing that we want to analyze. So for anyone who hangs around philosophy enough, there'll be the explanandum, the thing we were trying to explain. This is the analysandum, the thing we were trying to analyze. And then there'll be the explanans, that's the explanation, and the explanandum is the thing we're trying to analyze. So the analysans will be the analysis. But this is just philosophers philosophying. The paradigmatic instances of agency are actions that usually involve bodily movements. Although there are only a few arguments for this claim, many passages in the literature can be understood as taking this observation to suggest that agency is embodied. In what follows, I consider some of these passages to investigate how agency and embodiment are related. The resulting view might be overly strong, but it will serve the purpose of forming the basis of the taxonomy of disembodied actions. To be clear, I do not aim at giving a charitable interpretation of the literature. Rather, my point is that the authors below can be, and in some cases have been, understood as claiming that agency requires embodiment. This is fun. I've not actually ever seen someone be like, I'm not being charitable before. People have said other things, like I'm being quick, but they're just like, I'm not even going to be charitable. Point is to get the baseline here. So I will say I do like this author's writing. Granted, I don't know where we're going on this with the philosophy, but I've liked a few turns of phrase and what they're doing with their how they're laying things out at the moment. Okay, a prominent statement which many take to express the view that agency is necessarily embodied is found in Davidson. Quote, all primitive actions are bodily movements, end quote. This is an identity claim. Davidson contends not only that actions require movements, but that actions are identical to movements. Moreover, Davidson states that the movements to which actions are identical are movements of the body. Smith defends the same idea. Although it is far from clear that Davidson would subscribe to this view, some understand his expression bodily movement to mean the movement of not more than one human body. Hence, Ludwig, for example, deploys Davidson's quote in an argument against group agency. Among the theories of agency that identify actions with movements of the human body, Davidson's is but one view on offer. A competing identity theory distinguishes between different kinds of bodily movements and contends that actions are identical to one particular kind of bodily movement. For example, Haddock writes, quote, a physical action is a bodily movement and a physical act... a physical action is a bodily movement and a physical action is a determinate of the determinable bodily movement. Sorry, this is sort of repetitive. I got tripped up there. So yeah, physical action is a bodily movement and a physical action is a determinate of the determinable bodily movement. Yeah. Okay. This particular brand of identity theory, called the disjunctive theory, is defended by Haddock, McDowell, and Meldon. The idea is that there are, on the one hand, mere movements which are not actions, and on the other hand, agental movements which are actions. Yeah, so I guess this is the reflex versus non-reflex ones. An individual performs an action if and only if she performs a bodily movement of this particular second kind. Although these authors do not explicitly define what they mean by bodily and bodily movement, the expression could be taken to mean that an agent's body has a particular kind of makeup, for example, that is biological. Some authors state this explicitly. Adam says, I like how it's only necessary to know 2 points to determine a line. Yeah, how's that relevant? Tell me. Because, I mean, it's like, this is a mathematical thing. You don't need all the points to two will suffice? Okay. Yeah, so you're saying, look, that is kind of what's going on here. They're giving a stripped down version. Like, you don't have to know what a line is, you just have to know that there's 2 points involved. And that's fair. Like, that's kind of what's going on here. They're trying to strip down what counts as an action. Yeah. Okay. An agent, and this is a quote for some authors saying explicit things about being biological. An agent is an entity that has a body and can make the body move in various ways. Only creatures which have biological origin are self-movers. Persons have biological bodies and perform bodily actions in contrast to collectives. A collective is not a self-sufficient agent, for example, in the sense of being capable of performing basic bodily actions. End quote. But the expression bodily could be understood in at least 2 different ways. A body could be individuated narrowly or broadly. On a narrow individuation, body is understood as one's biological makeup. In contrast, on a broad individuation, an object counts as a body independently of its makeup, and whatever object is used for bodily functions is a body. I will return to this functional view of the body later. Many philosophers subscribe to the functional individuation of the body. As we will see, doing so is one way to avoid the problem I'm going to describe. Frank says a body is a collective, though. Yeah, so this is, I think, where we're going. Is you probably were typing this out as I was reading it. But, like, this is the idea. Like, there's the functional individuation is what it is. It's whatever you're using to do your stuff. Yeah, so this biological makeup, I guess, would count as one makeup thing. Yeah. What do we got there, Bowser? What is this? Oh, dodge roll. Nice. But for the moment, we must not dismiss the bot. Yeah, so back to Frank's point, we will find out what this person is going to say. They're going to have to say something about that. All right, continuing. But for the moment, we must not dismiss the view that the body is individuated narrowly. Many people deny that the body should be understood functionally. Some deny this because they reject the functionalist proposal at large and see agency instead as a restricted and distinctively human phenomenon. Others reject this particular kind of functionalism that underlies the broad individuation. Moreover, as we will see later, while individuating the body broadly is a good response to some cases, other cases require a different response. In these cases, there is a place for individuating a body narrowly. Between the passages above, we can see some overarching themes that come down to several key claims. Whether or not the authors have in fact made these claims or not, claims to this effect might be attributed to them and have been relied to promote arguments against group agency. I use these claims to define the embodiment view as the following 3 necessary conditions. So this is the embodiment view. E1, A is an agent of X only if A performs X. E2, A performs X only if A's body moves. And E3, A's body is individuated narrowly, as for example, the biological body. The first assumption of the embodiment view requires that an agent performs her actions herself. And so when I was complaining about performs her actions herself, that self I was complaining about now is coming up, where you're saying, well, maybe the self is a collective. So yeah. By performs, I understand roughly what we colloquially refer to with does. Yeah, so whatever it is you're performing, that's what you're doing. This assumption rules out doing an agency may come apart. The second assumption expresses the view that performing an action requires an agent's body to move. This is the condition by which many attempt to distinguish overt actions from mental actions. The third assumption specifies that by body we mean biological body, or that the body is individuated narrowly. Paradigmatic cases of agency meet all 3 conditions. If I pour milk in my coffee, then my biological body moves. E2 and E3 are true, and I perform the action myself. E1 is true. The theories that I have discussed in this section analyze overt actions in terms of bodily movements. In addition, there is a different family of theories that analyze actions as mental entities such as willings, tryings, or volitions. These theories are not committed to the embodiment view and hence are not susceptible to the following argument. Okay, so this, I guess, is like their master argument against embodiment here. This is called 4, agency without embodiment. So, sometimes cases arise that pose a problem for the embodiment view. In this section, I will use a counterexample to argue that the embodiment view is not true for all actions and that it is not even true for all overt actions. And you see this? I find this interesting. I like my rhetoric. They're telling you exactly what they're going to do. I will use a counterexample. You don't always see this, like the way people like foreshadow or what they tell you what they're going to do. Some people are very explicit, like, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this. This person is just like, conversational. I'm going to give you a counterexample. Here it comes. Okay. In particular, I argue that the embodiment view contradicts the minimal characterization of agency introduced in section 2. Since we want to hold on to these basic assumptions about agency, the embodiment view must be false. Adam says it is very mathematical, like a math proof. Yeah, this is a I mentioned this briefly at the beginning. This journal they're in is called Ratio. It's a ratio is like, it's an analytic thing. It's a numerical thing, like a number on top, like compared to another number. So this is going to be analytic philosophy, and they're going to argue in this way, like a mathematical proof. Like that's how they're going to proceed. So that's part of what's going on here. Is just this is specifically analytic philosophy. Although this is not necessarily an analytic topic. Agency is, of course, like general, but like they're going to argue in this sort of very formal way. Yeah, I mean, you can see I like this stuff. This is my area. Okay. The author develops a contradiction by amending a case involving an overt action that the embodiment view initially is able to handle. You see, they're going to say, I'm going to give you a contradiction, which is a formal thing. Okay. Twin Jim. Twin Jim wants to break the window of an old garden shed. He picks up a stone, throws it, and the window breaks. The case satisfies closure because there is an agent, Twin Jim, for the... and so, just so you know, there's something called Twin Earth. I expect it's coming up very quickly. But yeah, Twin Jim. Because there's an agent, Twin Jim, for the action breaking the window. The case also meets the intentional systems assumption because Twin Jim is a young human adult without any cognitive impediments. Finally, the embodiment view applies because Twin Jim has a biological body that moves to perform an action, which Twin Jim does himself. Hence, Twin Jim meets all the necessary above conditions to be an agent of breaking the window. But imagine a variation of the Twin Jim case. Suppose Jim uses a brain-machine interface to control a robot just as he can control his arm. The required technology is already available. Jim. So there's the example of Jim. Jim wants to break the window of an old garden shed. He has a baseball shooting machine that he can control via a brain-machine interface with his mind. The machine fires and the window breaks. The only difference between the cases of Twin Jim and Jim is how the event is brought about. Twin Jim uses a stone to break the window and Jim uses a ball shooting machine. But a change in tools should not make a difference as to whether or not there is an action. According to the minimal characterization of agency, Jim is not an agent of breaking the window. Yet according to the embodiment view, Jim is... Yeah, so minimal characterization is breaking the window, but according to the embodiment view, Jim is not an agent of breaking the window. This is a contradiction. Consider the argument in its deductive form. And so, yeah, Atom Fighter, this is what I mean by we're doing, like, very formal sort of, like, structure here. This is not needed. Like, I think that example was clear enough, but they're going to do the literal spelling out of the argument. So, and this is why I don't read formal stuff, because I'm going to be basically explaining what I just explained. Argument against the embodiment view. 1. X is an action. 2. There must be an agent. Either Jim or the machine is an agent. The machine is not an agent of X. Therefore, Jim is an agent of X. Jim's biological body does not move. Jim is not an agent of X. Contradiction. So we've got Jim is an agent here in this line. And the Jim is an agent of X here. So, yeah. There you get the consummate. So Jim is and is not an agent of that thing. This argument is valid, but is it sound? Assumptions 2 and 4 are the minimal characterization of agency that I have taken for granted. The remaining assumptions need to be defended against objections. So what were the other ones? All right, there's not a whole lot here. The first assumption is supported by symmetry considerations. Since breaking the window is an action in the case of Twin Jim, it must also be an action in the case of Jim. But one might object that the two cases are different. Twin Jim breaks the window, but only Jim fills the machine with stones and thereby brings about the window breaking. Breaking the window is an action in the case of Twin Jim, but it is only a consequence in the case of Jim. This objection lacks an argument for why breaking the window is not an action in the case of Jim. The objection seems to assume that there is at most one action in each case, but I see neither a compelling argument nor a clear intuition to support this assumption. Yeah, I mean, look, Twin Jim had to pick up the ball to throw it through the window. So there was always this gaining of like the ball in order to throw it, and then Jim had to fill the machine in order to like then trigger the machine to shoot the ball. Like there was always, you can always track things back in history. The problem with arguments like this in general is that they all go back to the Big Bang. And it's like, well, what are you arguing then? That the history of the universe? So people are always cherry picking which actions to talk about. And we let them do it. But like there's a bigger problem there. Okay. The third assumption is that either Jim or the machine is an agent of this X. One might object that this disjunction rules out a third alternative, namely that both together are an agent of breaking the window. It might be a joint action. But there cannot be a joint action between Jim and the machine. Each participant in a joint action must have beliefs, desires, intentions, or some kind of mental state, and the machine has no such state. For the same reason for which it cannot be an agent, the ball shooting machine cannot participate in a joint action. Frank said, I feel like I missed this up. Is there a reason the machine isn't Twin Jim's body? We're defining Twin Jim's body as not the machine. That's it. No, Jim's machine. The reason, this is Jim, not Twin Jim threw it himself with his arm. Jim used the machine. We are just defining Jim as Jim. That's part of the background here. Okay? So yeah. I mean, does that make sense? I'm not justifying the example. That's just what we're doing here. Okay? You see, so here, now you can see it. The fifth assumption states that Jim's body does not move. So clearly, we've made a distinction between Jim's body, which does not move, and the machine, which does move. Just by definition. Are we both Twin Jims, Slim Jims? I mean, only if you want to eat Jim's Slim Jim. So maybe. Whether this is true is a matter of definition. According to the embodiment view, body refers to the biological body. By movement, I understand a change in the macroscopic spatial region that the body occupies. Forming an intention or undergoing a change of brain state does not count as a movement. Hence, Jim's body does not move. Yet one might object that, in fact, Jim's body does move. He has to position the machine and fill it with stones. However, Jim could position the machine and then decide not to break the window. There seems to be two actions here, making preparations and breaking the window. Jim's body moves when making preparations, but it stands still when breaking the window. With respect to the latter action, assumption 5 is true. Agency is not necessarily embodied, as the counterexample of Jim shows. The seemingly overt action of breaking the window by changing how it is brought about violates the embodiment view. Frank says it feels slightly strawy to say embodiment view doesn't allow mechanics to be part of the body, but I think it's fair enough because a good fraction of embodied people would agree. I think that's all the author is going for here, and that's why they said they're not being charitable. They're saying, I'm going to be charitable enough to enough people that makes this view a significant view. And that's why I said that earlier, because I thought it was an interesting thing. So they're not trying to do a knockdown argument here. They're trying to knock down enough people to say, this is a view that people hold, and I'm going to show you why this is kind of wrong. So, yeah, it's a little it would be straw man-y if they were saying this is knocking down everyone. They're not. They're just saying, I'm knocking down enough people that matter. So, yeah. And that's a good strategy. Again, I'm complimenting this person's like rhetoric, but a lot of times you don't need a hugely strong argument. You only need it to be strong enough. Now, if they had tried to say this is what everyone holds, they would be wrong. They only need to knock down a non-trivial subsection or portion of like the philosophical literature out there, and that's plenty for what they're trying to do here. So like, just keep this in mind when you're writing stuff. You don't always need the strongest argument. You need just the argument to be as strong as you need it to be and no stronger. And usually if you go any stronger, you get yourself into a lot of trouble, as I've done before. Yeah. Okay. 3 kinds of disembodied actions. The embodiment view consists of 3 claims. To avoid contradicting the minimal characterization of agency in cases like that of Jim, which of these 3 claims should we give up? I suggest we should give up all of them. Not all at once, but one after the other. It turns out that the embodiment view conceals distinctions that can be useful for thinking about our actions. Iteratively giving up each of its claims makes room for kinds of disembodied actions that we may encounter now or in the future. They are proxy actions, extended actions, and extended movements, and they correspond to relaxing the first, second, and third claim of the embodied view, respectively. The typical examples of each kind involve groups, human-machine interactions, and virtual realities, respectively. Short of arguing that there actually exists instances of each kind of disembodied action, I offer a taxonomy and illustrate each kind of disembodied action. You see, again, they're not biting off more than they can chew. They're saying there's going to be a few different ways to go, and they're taxonomizing. They're not saying one of them is right, or better than the others. The kinds of disembodied action differ in which attributes they ascribe to whom. First, who is an agent of the action? Second, who performs the action? Third, whose body moves in performing the action. As one embodied claim after another is given up, more and more attributes are ascribed to the agent. Okay, so we got a little chart here. So if you knock off the first one, then you've got okay, so there's an action and a movement, and who's doing what is different in each of the cases. All right, so giving up E1, proxy actions. The first kind of disembodied actions are proxy actions. We make room for this kind when we give up the claim E1 that an individual has to perform an action herself. There can be an agent A and an action X such that A is an agent of X despite not performing X herself. Instead, some other B performs X on A's behalf. So it's like, did you order the code red? You're goddamn right I did. So who died? Well, some other guys died or whatever it was, but you're still responsible. The idea of proxy actions is by no means new. In Leviathan from 1651, Hobbes draws a distinction between the author and the actor of an action. What's up, Adam? He gives the example of an attorney representing a client in a court case. Feinberg describes a proxy agent as someone who is the mere mouthpiece of his principal. He is a tool in much the same sense as is a typewriter or telephone. Similarly, Kopp defines secondary action as cases where a person may properly have actions attributed to them on the basis of actions of other persons. Glad to hear it. Yeah, we're reading this paper on actions and who's responsible for what, and how do we actually attribute agency and actions to people, or agent, or not for that matter. It should be noted that the idea of proxy actions by itself does not yet disprove the embodiment view, because there are accounts of proxy actions that satisfy E1. For example, Ludwig requires an authorization of B by A to perform X on A's behalf. Yeah, so if I say you're my agent and you should go do this, then I've done one thing. I've granted you legal rights to go perform an action on my behalf. You sign papers for a lawyer, they go argue the case for you. Yeah, that makes sense. Hence, there is something A does even in a proxy action. In contrast, my taxonomy characterizes proxy actions differently. An individual B may perform an action X without being an agent of it, while another individual A may satisfy the conditions for agency for X. Agency here could consist in A, giving her authorization, but it could consist in something else as well. This makes room for alternative accounts of proxy action in which in terms of agency instead of authorization, but I leave open how agency would be defined by such accounts. So proxy action is defined. Any X is a proxy action if and only if there is an agent A such that A is an agent of X, but A does not perform X. So I wonder if there's going to be like an omission here. Like, so something happens because I avoided doing something else. But like, you know, I mean, maybe you could say the avoidance of doing something is an action, but maybe you just like you went to sleep. I don't know. Adam says, agency, any mention of decision theory prior to inaction. Yeah. So that's part of one of these assumptions that you actually have to be intentional about it. And so this is part of these things that the author is now going through and saying, well, what ways around all of this stuff are there? And so you can have maybe being an agent of something without having any intention. And we were talking earlier about reflexes and stuff. So yeah. Okay. Several candidates for proxy actions come to mind. For example, a spokesperson performs a proxy action when delivering a statement on behalf of the president. The president might be an agent of delivering the statement without performing the action herself. Because E1 is given up, performing an action oneself is not a necessary condition of being an agent of it. Delivering the statement is an action of which the president is an agent, but which is performed by the spokesperson. Yeah, so the agent could, I guess they give authority to the spokesperson, but like the spokesperson just does it without them, but it still like would be sanctioned by the president that the spokesperson, spoke on the certain topic. Then I guess like they might give like an after the fact justification for it, but like it still holds. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. For another example of a proxy action, consider a case of coercion. Suppose that a mafia commander forces a subordinate to steal a diamond ring. So are we still talking about the president here? I don't know. The commander exerts force in such a way that the subordinate is not morally responsible for the stealing. The subordinate performs a proxy action and steals the diamond ring on behalf of the commander. What makes this a proxy action is that the commander is an agent of the stealing and he can be held responsible for it, even though he does not perform the action. Yeah, but he's still the coercion, I guess. Okay, with this definition of proxy actions in hand, we can now also see the possibility of group agency more clearly. Groups could never perform their actions themselves because they do not have bodies of their own. Group actions would be proxy actions, but since embodiment is not necessary for agency, they would be actions nonetheless. An individual who acts on behalf of a group might perform an action without being an agent of this action and without being responsible for it. Yeah, so you could say if a mob forces you to do something, then it was really the mob's fault because you were afraid of the mob. You were coerced into it, but like the mob forced you to do it. And no one individual in that mob forced you to do the bad thing, but like it was just like, and I don't mean the mob in terms of like mafia. I mean just like a group of people are scaring you. Frank says, why don't groups have bodies? Yeah. So let's see. I'm not sure. I think it might be this extended movements down here when we get to that. I think they're going to get there here. But like, yeah, hold on to that. I'm not sure yet. But I think they're going to get to that in the third case. Okay. 2. Extended actions. The second kind of disembodied actions are extended actions. We make room for this kind when we give up the claim E2 that a bodily movement is required to perform an action. There can be an agent A and an action X such that A is an agent of X and A performs X herself, but A's body does not move in performing X. Instead, it is the body of another individual or tool that moves in course of performing X. So, extended action. Any X is an extended action of A if and only if A performs X, but A's body does not move in performing X. We find an example of an extended action in the case of Jim. He performs his action himself, E1 holds, and when his body is individuated narrowly, E3 holds, his body does not move, E2 fails. Frank says, I think it's plausible that a group convinces an individual to take a proxy action, but I don't really see why the individual's body isn't part of the group's body. Yeah. So again, I think this is just the arbitrary definitions that the author's making. I think you have a very good point here. I think it's just going to be in this like part down there when we get to it is when they're going to discuss this. Now, this is a rhetorical question. Is the way they're describing the problem the most effective way? Maybe not. If they don't discuss what you're saying, then I feel like they will have missed a good point. Now, and maybe the way they went about talking about this is part of that. Like they did not set the problem up in a way that they should have so that they could talk about what you're saying. Or they just missed it. That happens too. We're all human here. We make mistakes. We will see. I think they're going to at least talk about it somewhat. Okay. But yeah, wait till we get down to this part 3. Maybe you read ahead. I don't know. So, okay. Okay, so extended actions are common in human-machine interactions. A machine may move as the agent performs the action while the agent's body is perfectly still. For example, in the case of Jim, an agent may control the movements of an artifact using a brain-machine interface. With extended actions, human agency is no longer limited to its natural environment, but instead may extend into the virtual domain. When you use a brain-machine interface to control a mouse cursor on a screen, like I am doing, or even your virtual self in a virtual reality, you perform extended actions. In their respective virtual environments, these are overt actions, even though your body does not move in performing them. Frank says, again, a big fraction of embodiment people would agree with them that a group isn't embodied. I'm making the same mistake again. It's fine. Don't feel bad, Frank. Everyone has like, their bugaboos, like the things that they like looking at. And you have to like remember that like, oh yeah, I harp on this. Everyone else does not harp on this. It's just, the topics you like. That's all it is. So it's fine. Another prevalent example of extended actions is remotely controlled military drones. Suppose the pilot can control the drone's movements by programming tasks such as flying a patrolling pattern or reacting to unexpected group activity. These movements of the drone may be seen as actions that the pilot performs. Similar examples of this sort include driving the Mars exploration rover or, given their high degree of automation, piloting a modern commercial airplane. All right, so this is weird. What year is this from? 2018. So this is pre the current generation of AI where, this is not that old. But like the idea that like we have these black box drones that could kill us now, but like we had thought about this. This is not like this is from like, the 70s or something or earlier where the killer drones were really far future. We have this shit now. So it's like, this is a bigger problem now. And I feel like they're a little bit light right here. Like, you're saying you're blaming the programmers or the pilots for a black box AI. And that's kind of a little bit mysterious at the moment because we were making these artificial intelligence things that make decisions on their own that we really, and it does things that we don't expect. So it's a little bit hard, but you can still sort of blame the military programmers or whatever that set this up. So it's like, we've got AI driving cars and the AI driving car kills somebody on the road. Who do we blame? Do we blame the programmers or the people who tested it? Where? So this is a little bit quick on all of this here, but you still get the point that there should be someone who is responsible that is removed from the AI, the automated driving car, but still like needs to be held responsible either with the company or who set it up or whatever it is. Okay. Giving up E3, extended movements. The third kind of disembodied actions are extended movements. We make room for this kind of action when we give up the claim, E3, that the body is individuated narrowly as the biological body. There can be an agent of an action X who performs X herself, and her body moves through her biological body, although her biological body remains stationary. The agent's body moves only in the sense that there is a distinct object B, which is individuated as part of the agent's body, and is only this B part of the agent's body that moves when the agent performs the action. So extended movement. A movement of A is extended if and only if there is an action X such that A's body moves in performing X, but A's narrowly individuated body does not move. Applied to the case of Jim, this would imply that the machine is part of Jim's body. So I think this is where you were trying to get to, Frank. So the machine is part of Jim's body in this case. This seems implausible because the ball shooting machine is not connected with Jim's biological body in the right way. But perhaps parts of a body do not need to be connected. Instead, one could contend that the body is just those objects under an agent's control, regardless of how the agent is connected to them. Yeah, and so this would also work for groups, because it would be objects under the agent's control, and objects could include other agents, I would assume here. So, like, this is exactly where I think, the body is just those objects under an agent's control, and it's not very specific what those objects might be. Okay, one common class of extended movements is when artifacts augment the biological body. A prevalent case is the use of prosthetic limbs that are controlled via a brain-machine interface. If a prosthetic is permanently attached to an agent's biological body, and if its use is transparent to the agent, moving the prosthetic is something the agent can just do, then it is plausible to think that it forms a part of the agent's body. To the agent, it may even feel like a limb is part of the body. In another class of extended movement, an artifact not just augments but temporarily replaces an agent's body. So avatar. Jake is a paraplegic. There is an artificial humanoid body in which he and only he can log in. This body is his avatar. During the time in which he is logged in, Jake perceives everything as if he were the avatar. He controls the avatar's movements and has no conscious awareness of his biological body. What's that movie? The guy from District 9 did this movie that was kind of first-person video gamey. And I don't want to spoil it, but this is kind of like this sort of example here, where someone and there's a lot of sci-fi stuff. Hardcore Henry. So if you haven't seen Hardcore Henry, it's kind of fun. It's a little crazy, but yeah. Not saying it's the best movie, but it's kind of a wild ride. Yeah. Thank you, Vipers. I think I got there just before you got it typed out. It could be argued that Jake has two bodies, his biological body and his avatar body, which he controls at various times. Yeah, thank you. Oh, so world's first wireless bionic hand. Fun. Yeah, see? It's happening. So it could be argued Jake has two bodies, his biological body and his avatar body, which he controls at various times. When the avatar body moves, these are movements of Jake's body. Already with existing virtual reality technology, agents may feel like they themselves are the avatar that they control. Setting aside various issues about consciousness and personal identity, the avatar case is another example of an extended movement. I mean, and here on Twitch, we have so many VTubers, PNG tubers, all this sorts of things. So, there's a lot of weird shit going down on this website that, is related to these sorts of things. And, the way people relate to the VTuber and the way the controller relates to the VTuber, yeah, that's a whole nother problem. Okay, so we're just about done. Conclusion. In this paper, I argue that that agency need not be embodied, and I offered a systematic taxonomy of 3 different kinds of disembodied action. First, others can act on behalf of the agent. These actions are proxy actions. Second, the movements of others can form the actions of an agent. For example, the patrol pattern that the drone flies is an action of the pilot who controls it remotely. These are extended actions. Third, the movement of others can be movements of an agent herself. An artificial or virtual extension can qualify as parts of an agent's body, and accordingly, these actions involve extended movements. This taxonomy results from relaxing each of the 3 claims underlying what I've put forth as the embodiment view. It allows us to distinguish these different kinds of actions systematically. So here's another overview. In the first half of this paper, I developed the embodiment view and argued that it does not even hold true for so-called overt actions, which contrast with mental actions and omissions. Although some authors could be understood as holding the embodiment view, this view is relevant not because of who holds it, but because of the arguments that depend on it. Yeah, so this is what I was saying earlier. This is a very clever way of saying, I don't actually need to show that anyone actually holds this, but that enough people rely on these sorts of premises. Okay, finishing up. Most prominently, the embodiment view rules out the agency of groups. If agents must be embodied, then groups are not real agents. By arguing that agents do not need to be embodied, I have defended the possibility of group agency. Group actions are a specific kind of disembodied actions. They are proxy actions which individuals perform on behalf of the group. And there we go. So, thank you all for sticking through this one. I thought this was actually pretty well written. I only stumbled. I think I stumbled mostly because it was my fault, not because of the writing. They weren't using terrible big words. I thought their examples were relatively straightforward as these things go. But here's what we do now. If you're new here, you get to review the paper using emotes. So these are better TTV emotes. If you only see the text in your chat, you can see below. You actually see the emotes in chat, and you get to use them. So brain dance and spelling and capitalization do count. If this was fun and made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. Nog scream if it's existential artistic drama. Nog oro, the Ouroboros for deeper ancient ideas. Nog knife slicing and dicing arguments. Nog navel gazing only for academics. Nog turd, all style no substance, still poop underneath. Nog grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You also can use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and my vote meh. Note that I do calculate like an overall score, so anything in the green makes the score go up, anything in the red makes the score go down, and the vote meh actually makes everything go to mill. And you can reuse emotes too. Vipers gave it a dance, scream, knife, and a yay, so that's pretty good. What's up, Latvian Jesus? Frank gave it a yay and a knife. It was close to dancing and existential, but I think it wasn't quite fun or scary enough. See, that's fair. That's perfectly fair. Yeah, so I felt like, this was a nice paper. It didn't bite off more than it can chew. This is like an anti-grapes paper. They were very measured in what they were doing and in their claims. And in that way, they made their final argument without actually overstepping. And in some sense, that was very restrained of this author to plan this out in that way. So, so we're getting some yays. It was well liked. I liked it. So let's see. What should I give it? Was this fun? Well, it broke everything down into analytic nonsense. So it's getting 2 nog knives from me, actually. Only the conclusion, but seemed quite good off of it. Okay. Yeah. Well, so the overall strategy of this paper was they presented an argument that kind of was in the background of a lot of other theories. They even outright said, I'm not going to say any one person made this, but it's very in the background with a lot of stuff. And then they went and they attacked the presuppositions in that argument. And then they said, look, you can go a bunch of different ways, and not even that anyone hold this, but these are the possibilities for all the people that discuss stuff in the area. And that's very clever. They got their conclusion without attacking anyone, but they say, look, a lot of people are going to be in this neighborhood, and these are the different ways you could leave. So yeah. Adam said, biologically, I read a certain parasite, fungi, and worm can control hosts, called manipulative parasitism, causing fearless behavior or causing the host to destroy itself. Yeah. The premise of The Last of Us. Yeah. I mean, what's it called? I mean, that fucking fungus that controls insects is just scary. If you look up the actual videos of that stuff, it's crazy. That shit. Cordyceps. Thank you. Cordyceps. That shit's crazy. You go look that stuff up. That's scary as shit. And what's it go? Toxoplasmosis. Now, this has been a little bit argued against, I think, but toxoplasmosis is a virus that is in cat poop. And rats get it. And if the rats get the toxoplasmosis bacteria, it's bacteria, not virus, it makes them more reckless. So it affects the rat's behavior. And one of the interesting things about rats and humans is that we are very much like rats. And cordyceps tends to fuck with our head. I'm not cordyceps. Toxoplasmosis fucks with our heads. And in some sense, it may make some people more reckless. So it's there are things out there that may actually affect how we act. So that's toxoplasmosis. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, the toxoplasmosis made me do it. And I was like, all right, that is super nerdy, but really quite funny. I'm going to also give it a vote EA. So yeah. This is like good analytic philosophy. Use some like technical definitions, made their arguments. Like, it was cool. Now, was it existential? No. Like, that's not what it did. Did it really talk about some deeper ancient ideas? I mean, kind of, but not really. Like, the whole point was that, like, these are the different ways, like, researchers could go in different stuff. Nogknife, I gave it 2 of those. Nognavel, I thought it was actually, reasonably well written for other people, so it wasn't really only for academics. Nogturd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. No, I thought they made their arguments, and they didn't overstate their claims either, so they didn't get a grapes. So yeah, so this is like 2 knives and a yay for me, which is a pretty good paper. And like, as far as analytic philosophy goes, this is good. So I was saying, this is in an analytic philosophy journal called Ratio. I haven't read a whole lot from Ratio, but if they're all like this, I'll be much happier with them. I've read stuff from them before, and it was just kind of navel-gazing analytic philosophy. But like, if this is like the good stuff, like, this is a credit to like analytic philosophy. Adam gave it a knife and a brain dance. Cool. Viper says it's existential if you're on the internet as much as Vipers is. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, different stuff will affect different people in different ways. It's like, yeah. So that's cool.